He won more matches than any man in the Open era, 1,274 victories, but he never won the one fight that mattered. Jimmy Connors didn't play tennis to become great, he played to settle a debt. And the problem with revenge, it doesn't have an expiration date. This is the story of what happens when anger becomes fuel, and you can't turn the engine off. Before we go any further, you need to understand something. Jimmy Connors wasn't supposed to exist in the world he dominated. Tennis in the 1970s was a gentleman's sport. Country clubs, white shorts, polite applause. Connors came from East St. Louis, a place where the factories were dying and violence was the local currency. He brought the street fight to the country club, and the country club never forgave him. But here's what most people don't know. That rage, it had a birthday. It started on a public tennis court when he was 8 years old. And it never stopped. Jones Park, Belleville, Illinois, 1960. Jimmy's practicing with his mother Gloria and his grandfather Al Thompson. Two men approach. What happened next changed everything. The men attacked. Gloria was beaten so badly her teeth were knocked out, blood on the concrete, her face destroyed. Jimmy watched the whole thing, 8 years old, powerless. That feeling, helplessness, it branded itself into his nervous system. The next morning, Gloria walked back onto that court, hundreds of stitches in her mouth. Couldn't speak. She picked up a racket and started hitting balls with her son. She couldn't say the words, so she showed him the lesson. If she could do this the day after that, then he had no excuse, ever. Gloria called it tiger juices, the ability to channel rage into something productive, something unstoppable. That day, Jimmy Connors learned something most people never figure out. Pain isn't something you avoid, it's something you use. And if you use it right, you never have to feel powerless again. But here's the thing about using anger as fuel. Once you start, you can't stop. Because stopping means feeling what's underneath. And what do you do when the rage is the only thing keeping you upright? Gloria and his grandmother, Mom, became his entire universe. Two women training a boy to destroy men. They didn't teach him to win, they taught him to survive. And survival meant never letting anyone make you feel small again. By the early 1970s, Connors wasn't just winning, he was declaring war. Wimbledon, US Open, Australian Open, 8 Grand Slam titles, 109 career titles. Across the 70s and early 80s, the numbers were staggering, but the victories didn't calm him, they made him hungrier. Because every match became another chance to prove the same thing, that he belonged, that they couldn't break him, that Jones Park would never happen again. His weapon of choice? A steel racket that everyone said was impossible to control, the Wilson T2000. He even slept with it, not because he was obsessed with tennis, because he was obsessed with never being defenseless. But the establishment, they hated him. Connors sued the ATP. He sued Arthur Ashe, a man everyone loved. In 1974, he was banned from the French Open, the one tournament he needed to complete the calendar Grand Slam. They took it from him, not because he wasn't good enough, because he refused to play by their rules. For a kid who'd watched justice fail on a public court in Belleville, it felt like the same story on red clay in Paris. But here's what he never admitted. Part of him wanted them to hate him, because being the outsider was safer than risking acceptance. And here's where it gets dark. Most athletes, when they dominate, they relax, they enjoy it. Connors couldn't, because the wins didn't heal anything. They just reminded him that the rage was still there, waiting. His rival, John McEnroe, saw it. McEnroe said their rivalry was one of the most bitter in history, not because they were so different, because they were too similar. Two outsiders who needed the fight more than they needed the trophy. But Connors never gave McEnroe credit, because acknowledging McEnroe meant acknowledging his own reflection. And he wasn't ready for that. How long can you carry that kind of rage before it starts carrying you? This channel is for people who understand that tennis is just the stage. The real story is always what's happening inside. If that's you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. But there was one night, one match, where everything Connors had been carrying almost collapsed. Wembley, 1981. Connors is 29. The press is calling him finished. He's facing John McEnroe in the final, and he's losing, down 2 sets. The crowd's already writing him off. But something happens. He goes back to the only place he's ever known. Jones Park, the lesson Gloria taught him when she walked onto that court with her face destroyed. The point isn't over until it's over. Your pain doesn't matter. Your exhaustion doesn't matter. What matters is refusing to be helpless. He wins 3 straight sets, takes the match. McEnroe falls apart. For one moment, standing there with that trophy, something shifted. Relief. Like maybe finally this was enough. But by the next morning, the emptiness was back. But look at his face. He's not happy. He's not relieved. He's just proven, again, that he can survive. And that's not the same as living. The pattern continues, year after year. But the real climax, it doesn't come in his prime. It comes 10 years later. US Open, 1991. Connors is 39 years old. In a sport where most champions retire at 32, he's still out there, still fighting. He makes it to the semi-finals. The crowd goes insane. They love him now. The same people who booed him in 77. The crowd had forgiven him. He hadn't forgiven anything, but here's what nobody talks about. He wasn't there because he still believed in glory. He was there because stopping meant confronting what he'd been running from for 31 years. The rage that built him had become the cage that kept him. His body was falling apart. Surgeries on his wrist, his knees, his hips, but he kept playing. Not because he loved tennis, because he was terrified of what silence sounded like. What's left when the fight is the only thing that feels like home. He lost in the semis. The crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted minutes, but Connors walked off that court the same way he walked onto it 30 years earlier, carrying the same weight, just older. Jimmy Connors retired with 1,274 victories, more than Federer, more than Nadal, more than anyone. But those numbers don't tell you what it cost. He once said the satisfaction of hitting one perfect shot, even at 70, was enough to keep him going. But that's not passion, that's dependency. The truth is, Connors never healed from Jones Park. He just found a way to make the wound productive. And maybe that's the real lesson. Some people turn trauma into fuel, but fuel burns, and eventually you run out of things to set on fire. Connors proved you could turn rage into greatness, but he also proved something darker. Greatness doesn't make you whole, it just makes you better at hiding the cracks. He spent 40 years avenging his mother's blood on that concrete, but revenge doesn't have an endpoint. It just has consequences. Jimmy Connors didn't just refuse to quit, he couldn't, because quitting meant feeling everything he'd been outrunning since he was 8 years old. And maybe that's not strength. Maybe that's just survival wearing a disguise. If this story made you think about something you've been carrying, check the pinned comment. There's something there that might make sense.